Jimmy loves this game. Okay, welcome back. I'm here with Jimmy and the Kitty Club, and we're gonna do our next installment of Avril Crump and her amazing clones. So, if you remember last time, Boney had gone to the supermarket, and it seems he didn't really understand how it worked and just thought you got to take all the food you wanted. So he very happily did that, and he's making breakfast, and the police show up. So Eddie is trying to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, where are Avril and Dr. Weatherby? Okay, the policewoman's beady eyes narrowed. "Let us in, dear." It did not sound as if she thought Eddie was very dear at all. "I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to talk to strangers." Okay, the policewoman gave up all pretense of kindness. "Watts, search the house." "Should I break the door down again?" Watts said. "Yes, if necessary," the policeman said. "I want this place turned upside down." Eddie's brain was working very fast. "There's no one here but me. I'm all alone. I'm, an orphan?" Watts gazed down at her sadly. "Yes," Eddie beamed at him. "Yes, an orphan, that's it. It's very sad," she said, her lower lip trembling. "I shouldn't have done it, but I was hungry. I didn't dare do the shoplifting myself," she continued, "so I found an old tramp to do it for me." "An old tramp?" "Yes, a complete stranger. He got me the food, and then he vanished. I think he went that way," she gestured vaguely down the road. "I'm sorry, I was starving." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the sound of the policeman sniffling. "Watts!" snapped the policewoman. "For heaven's sake, pull yourself together." She glared down at Eddie. "Is this the truth?" "Why would I lie?" Eddie said. "My dear dead parents taught me never to lie." Watts began to sob. "Poor little mite." "All right," the policeman looked at Watts with disgust. "We'll have to believe you, but we shall be looking for this tramp. We can't have his kind corrupting children. Now, you'd better come along with us." Eddie stared at her. "What do you mean? We can't leave you here all alone. Look at you dressed in that thin little white coat. In this weather. It's amazing social services hasn't done anything." The policewoman took Eddie's arm. Eddie wriggled in her grasp. "You can't take me away." She appealed to the teary Watts for help. "Please, I'm not an orphan. It was all a lie. My Uncle Lionel has just gone out for a few minutes. I can't leave." Watts patted her head. "I understand. A fantasy world must be very appealing, but your parents would have wanted the best for you. Your schoolwork must be suffering." "School?" Eddie repeated blankly. "You do go to school?" demanded the policewoman. Eddie's terrified stare was her only response. "Truant," she muttered. "Well, you will go to school, starting today. And just to make sure you don't wheedle your way out of it, we'll take you there ourselves, after we've gone to social services." She dragged Eddie down the icy garden path and pushed her into the car. The door slammed shut. Eddie felt sick with fear as she stared up at the house. There was a furry face at the window, with all hints of its usual smirk gone. "You've been so kind," she suddenly howled at the top of her lungs. "Taking me to school and everything. I'm sure I'll love it." She prayed that Augustus could hear her. "Tell me," she lowered her voice to speak to Watts, "is school far away?" "We'll probably take you to St. Swithin's. It's only around the corner." Eddie wound down her window. "I can hardly wait," she roared. "St. Swithin's School, and only around the corner, too." As the car began to pull away, she saw Augustus nod. "She's clearly disturbed," she overheard Watts say to the policewoman. "Either that or just plain crazy." But Eddie did not care what the policeman thought. Augustus had heard her cries. Lionel would know where that she had been taken. It was the best she could do for now. Okay. Chapter 9 is called The Black Sheep of Leviticus. The first thing Avril realized as she awoke from her long, unnatural sleep was that she was alone. There was no sign of Dr. Weatherby. This could only be a good thing. Even better was the soft suede of the sofa on which she found herself sitting. It was the color of pale buttermilk and as strokable as a baby's skin. It felt wonderful. She wriggled luxuriously for a few moments before noticing that her elbows, grimy with soot from the explosion, had left a dirty smudge. The fabric was so delicate that some spit and polish only made it worse. Avril placed a strategic cushion over the gray area, hopped to her feet, and looked around. She was standing, grubbily and shabbily, in the most magnificent room she had ever seen. Tall bookshelves towered from the rich wooden floor to the high vaulted ceiling. They were filled with leather-bound, gold-embossed books. Glossy oil paintings hung in the spaces between the bookshelves. Antique tables were elegantly decorated with exquisite lamps and ornamental curiosities. A fire that was far too tasteful to roar or crackle simply glowed warmly in a large fireplace. It was beautiful. In somewhat of a daze and grinding grit from her shoes into the thick rugs, Avril wandered toward the only visible door. She tried the brass handle. It was locked tight. So she was a prisoner. Cream suede sofas and glowing log fires were all very nice, but Avril needed to be out of there searching for the clones. Dr. Weatherby might have caught up with them by now. Then she saw it. The tea tray. There it sat on the large desk, an enormous silver tray laden with teapot, cups, saucers, and plates. Plates that were piled high with sandwiches and scones. There were little sponge cakes with pink icing. There were large sponge cakes with green icing. There were sticky buns. There were chocolate eclairs. There were huge blueberry muffins. There were donuts. Avril's stomach rumbled. No, she said to herself. This is no time for snacks. You have friends to save. She turned her back to the tea tray and began pulling out books from all the tall shelves, hoping that one might conceal a mechanism to some sort of secret passage. She had not watched all those action films for nothing. The floor was covered with books by the time she gave up, and she decided to try something else. She started tapping along the dark wooden paneling down one side of the room, listening for any hollow sounds. When this, too, led to nothing, Avril threw back one of the thick rugs and scanned the parquet floor for gaps before digging her short fingernails into the thin lines between the floorboards. She strained and heaved, but the floor stayed put. Wiping the sweat from her forehead, Avril stood up and scanned the room for another escape possibility. Locked door, solid floorboards, no secret passages. She was panting heavily, as much from anxiety as from exertion. Her eyes alighted again on the silver tray as steam curled from the teapot. Perhaps just one cup. Her stomach rumbled again, louder this time. If I'm going to find those clones, Avril decided, I'll need my strength, and I can take supplies. She poured a cup of boiling tea and drank deeply, then took a piece of fruitcake and ate it hungrily. Now for those supplies. What would the clones want to eat when she found them? She had just popped an enormous jelly donut into the pocket of her lab coat when she heard a noise at the door. Somebody was coming in. She tried hurriedly to swallow the large, partially chewed chunk of fruitcake. A raisin went down the wrong way. She choked noisily. Dr. Crump? The door clicked almost silently shut. Are you all right? Avril sprayed cake crumbs all over the shining floor. That looked rather uncomfortable. I'm afraid I have startled you. The words seemed friendly enough. The male voice was smooth and mellifluous. But Avril was on her guard. She pulled herself together, looked up, and blinked. Then a hot blush began to spread over her face. He was the best-looking man she had ever seen. I do apologize for the manner of your arrival last night, Dr. Crump. I do not like to drug my guests, but security is of the utmost importance. Ah, I see you have made a start on the refreshments. I do like a woman with a healthy appetite. He raked a hand through his thick blonde hair and smiled again. His teeth were beautifully white. They matched his pristine lab coat. You're a scientist? Avril stared at his broad shoulders and sea-green eyes. Indeed I am. He tilted his head, displaying a strong jaw. Avril giggled girlishly, then hiccuped. Welcome to Gargoyle Manor, Dr. Crump. The Vision moved toward the cream suede sofa and lowered himself onto it. He patted the other end of the sofa. Please sit down. Avril was not too dazzled by her visitor to remember that an ugly gray stain covered the patch beneath the cushion. She sat hurriedly before he could lift it. I hope you've been comfortable in my library, Dr. Crump, or may I call you April? He put his hand on her knee and squeezed it gently. He was wearing an elegant silver signet ring. This is my favorite room in Gargoyle Manor. The previous owner, the 34th Earl of Midden, let it fall into terrible disrepair. I only bought the place because it is near Leviticus. After all, what scientist would not want to be close to the very hub of the scientific world? Avril gulped and stared at the hand on her knee. Actually, it's Avril, she murmured. But you can call me April if you like. She was hoping that her bald head was not shining too brightly under the lights. A brief spasm of irritation passed across the man's handsome face. He pulled a black leather notebook from his lab coat pocket and flipped over a few pages. Avril, he muttered. He crossed something out with a small pen and wrote in a few words. His face cleared. Forgive me, he smiled. My intelligence sources have let me down. My name is Professor Gideon Blute. He placed his elegant hand back on Avril's knee. Please, call me Gideon. Professor Blute? Avril stared. The Professor Blute? The black sheep of Leviticus Laboratories? The very same, although those who worked with me back then would not recognize me now. My appearance has, shall we say, improved somewhat these last 15 years. He closed his eyes for a moment and raised his head, as if basking in sunlight. Do you think me handsome, Avril? Oh, yes, yes, I do. Very handsome indeed. Very handsome indeed. Gideon's eyes flicked open. Just as I always was meant to be. Nature likes its little jokes, Avril. You of all people will know what I mean. He smiled and gave Avril's bald head a gentle pat. Nature tries to spread out the power. Those who are beautiful are not permitted to be intelligent. Those who are ugly, he gave a bitter little laugh, are dealt the consolation of a brilliant mind. But I play with nature, Avril. I see no reason why a genius, like myself, cannot also be pleasing to the eye. Do you? Avril squeaked. Tell me, how are things at Leviticus? Well, I have prospered since those wretches threw me out in ignominy, Gideon interrupted. Of course, they would no doubt condemn my work. Fools often condemn that which they do not understand. But as you see, he gestured at the opulent library, then turned to her with a dazzling smile. Disgrace has its rewards. You and I are mavericks, Avril. We do not need the approval of those we despise. I cannot wait to see the faces of all those who mocked and belittled me over the years when they discover how I have thrived. Avril yelped at his hand, gave her knee another gentle squeeze. The silver ring he wore was decorated with some sort of insignia. It looked sort of like a large bird about to devour a smaller one. She reached for a sandwich to distract herself. But enough about Leviticus. Gideon leaned in conspiratorially. I want to tell you about my new work, my mission. Mission? Avril was starting to feel rather giddy in his presence. Gideon poured himself a cup of tea and took a sip. It has been my dream ever since I started my revolutionary research into human cloning all those years ago at Leviticus to create a world governed solely by the principles of Blut's Law. Blut's Law? Yes. Gideon gave her a perplexed glance. Do you always repeat everything people say, Avril? It's an extremely irritating habit, if I may say so. Please do not interrupt my train of thought again. He sat back and sipped his tea. Blut's Law. Human success is inversely proportional to human degeneracy. Not widely known yet in scientific circles, or in any circles. He chuckled at his own joke. But that will not be the case for much longer. Human degeneracy? Is there an echo in here, do you think, Avril? Sitting up straight now, Gideon's green eyes were flints of steel. Or are you simply ignoring my polite request that you refrain from repeating my every word? Oh, no, Avril preferred it when his eyes were gazing benevolently at her. It's just that I don't understand Blut's Law. Once again, Gideon flicked open his notebook, studying a page in puzzlement. Yes, he murmured to himself. It does say here that she's highly intelligent. He looked up at Avril again, and this time spoke very loudly and clearly. Human success is inversely proportional to human degeneracy. In other words, in simpler words if you prefer, it is time to skim off the scum and start again. Let me tell you a little story, Avril, about how Blut's Law began. Do stop me if you can't follow. He sipped his tea. Not long after I had begun working with that second-rate cell cloning team at Leviticus, a starving beggar approached me as I was leaving my house one morning. He was a filthy, smelly old man, covered in sores and boils and dressed in horrible rags. He was ill with a cancer, he said, and horribly frostbitten from spending nights on the street. It was then that I had my beautiful moment of inspiration, Avril. To find a cure for his cancer? Avril felt relief sweep over her. She had obviously misunderstood him, what with that rather alarming talk of missions and corruption. To find a scientific solution to world hunger? Gideon smiled at her and patted her hand. Dear Lord, no. To destroy him. Avril's delicious sandwich, moist smoked salmon and soft brown bread, suddenly tasted like cardboard. She choked. Him and all of his kind, all the losers, Avril, all the good-for-nothings. He leaned forward, his green eyes glowing, not looking at Avril, but gazing into space. I can do it. I can create a race of super beings. I can rid the world of cripples and the deformed, the stupid. He raised an eyebrow in her direction. The old, the sick, the weak, the very dregs, his lip curled, of this failing society. I call them NVs, Avril, the non-viables. Just imagine how beautiful this world will be without them. Think of what can be achieved when the human race is cleansed of undesirables and filled with the very best that my unique cloning technology can offer. Avril could not really believe what she was hearing. She even glanced over her shoulder for a moment, hopeful that she might see the Leviticus staff gathered behind them, bent over with hysterical laughter at this joke at her expense. But nobody was there, and the cruel twist to Gideon's lips that she had suddenly noticed left her in no doubt that he was telling the truth. But why? Was all she could manage. Well, why not? Gideon sat back again and roared with laughter at his wit. Tell me, why not, Avril? He said, when he had recovered. Why not push back the boundaries? Why not take science beyond its limits? The ones with the knowledge are scared of all the possibilities. Most scientists will only go so far. Cowards, cloning sheep and pigs. Gideon sneered. Don't make me laugh. And as for talking dogs, the very idea disgusts me. Avril opened her mouth. A chunk of sandwich fell out. But how do you know about that? She was booming again, her nerves playing havoc with her already strange voice. I have, how shall I put it, an associate in place at Leviticus Laboratories. I think you may know her, Dr. Seducta. Dr. Seducta, Avril repeated faintly. Okay, we're going to stop there for tonight. The plot thickens. Ooh, that Gideon is awful, right? Okay, I will see you next time. Bye.